often, you know, my name is Brandon Johnson, by the way. I guess I should introduce myself. I'm the Executive Director of the New Mexico Humanities Council. Most days, I'm in there in my office, typing away on some document, looking for support, right? Doing some fundraising, talking with people back in Washington about federal funding, and it's not very often that I can sort of break the surface, so to speak, and participate in a humanities event like this. So thank you for being here. It enriches the events like this enrich the work that we do day to day here at the Humanities Council. As I said, my name is Brandon Johnson. I have some wonderful colleagues here that I work with, and for tonight, I think the most important colleague of mine is Jody Hederig over here. Jody is the work that was done by the folks who provided their stories and their objects, and Jody. Jody she designed the space, put the show together. So thank you, Jody, for doing that. We have events like this on a rotating basis, so I would say watch our Facebook page, take a look at our website, sign up to be on our email list so that you can come back and visit us again and engage in more conversation and feed your souls. Since the 1970s, the New Mexico Humanities Council has been here in Albuquerque. We got started back in the Lyndon Johnson era. President Johnson signed the legislation that created the State Humanities Council. So each state and American territory has a Humanities Council like this. We do other things besides the exhibits that we host here. We sponsor the New Mexico the National History Day for New Mexico, the History Day program, where we bring young people together to learn how to think historically. They do amazing work over the year, and they present their projects. Well, it's coming up this month. We'll have our state contest. We also provide grants. If you're interested in finding out more about the grants that we provide, take a look at our website. Or, where's Michelle? Is Michelle here? Talk to Michelle. Michelle's our program officer, our senior program officer in charge of grants. And then we have a speakers bureau. We have some speakers who do presentations in character, which is always interesting, and then others that don't. So take a look at the programs that we sponsor and think about how you can tie in with the work that we do. Let me just say thank you to the following folks, and I'm no doubt going to get names wrong, so you'll have to forgive me. Adélamar Alcántara, is that right? Alcántara, right. I didn't have the accent there, right? What can I say? Ikuko Begay, Viengkeo Kay, is it Viengkeo Kay Bounkeua? Is that right? Kay? Okay, I'm sorry. Esther Churchwell, and then Fay Yao. Thank you for sharing your objects and your stories with us. And without further ado, I'm going to turn the time over to Jody to introduce our guests.
Thank you, Brandon. I just want to take a moment to thank all of the people who came to the table and helped plan this exhibit early on when we wanted to find a way to honor Asian Pacific American Heritage Month in May. And I really like to thank Kay, because I reached out to her, and she helped bring a very diverse group to the table to talk about what should we talk about in the exhibit. And what we decided is to focus on individuals and their individual stories of identity, family identity, ethnic identity. But what's interesting is that I think this is just the beginning of this relationship. There is very vibrant conversation at the table, and I think that there are a lot of ideas that we weren't able to produce for this exhibit. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to continue the conversation and bring a voice to a very vibrant community in Albuquerque. But at this point, I'd really like to invite each of our guest exhibitors to share with you in their own words their story and their artwork, their objects. I've had trouble with that word. It's such a bland word because, as you can see, these pieces of the heart are from the heart. They're vibrant. They speak on their own. But I'm going to have their voice come up and talk about them. So I'd like to introduce, and I sympathize with Brandon. I empathize with you because I confessed this to Kay. I went to, how do you pronounce, and on the internet it was Bounkeua. And she's like, that's close. So please welcome Fay Yao.
Thank you so much, everyone, and thank you to Jody for reaching out to us. I think this is an exhibit that I would have loved to have seen in Albuquerque when I was a little kid. It means so much to have any kind of representation of Asian American history, and to also have it be presented by Asian Americans themselves makes such a huge difference. And even the fact that we broke it out into the different groups, right, that means a lot, because usually we're all clumped under this umbrella term of Asian American, and for a lot of us, we say, like, what does that even mean, right? So this means a lot to myself, and hopefully to a lot of people here, and to our community, and we're so excited. I'm the executive director as well of Asian Family Center, and we just moved in next door. So we'll be with Jody and Brandon. Yeah, we'll bring our community for sure. So we're just excited to be part of this neighborhood and to be a part of this work. So my journey here to New Mexico, I was actually born here, and the way that we tell a story in our families and communities is the story always starts with who came before you. I'm not going to spend all my time with that, but I will start with my parents because that's how I came here, and there would have been no other way for me to be here in Albuquerque without their migration story. So give me 1 second. I'm actually going to read an article that was printed in October 8th of 1980. So if you're a refugee or undocumented or an immigrant, we know how impactful it is to have any kind of documentation, because oftentimes we arrive with nothing. We have no birth records, we have no paperwork, right? So anything we can have makes us feel more visible, right? Makes it almost a more tangible process. So this was an article written about my father when he came here from Laos. The title is called Modern Day Man Without a Country. So Ging Nan Boonkeua, my father, has several roles in life. Ging speaks Chinese, Thai, and Lao, as well as English. Because of his multilingual ability, Highland High School has hired him to act as an interpreter for the non-English speaking students at Highland. King is a sophomore studying electrical engineering at the University of New Mexico. He's a husband and a father. He's a refugee from Laos, or is he? The United States Immigration and Naturalization Service insists that Ging and his two brothers are Thai, not Lao, and should return to Thailand because their visas have expired. Ging, his two brothers, and their sister are subject to the same federal immigration laws, but all four have been treated differently. Ging's sister, who lives in California, was granted permanent refugee status, meaning she can live and work in this country permanently. Ging can work in this country only because an INS official accidentally stamped a document allowing him to do so. King's two brothers cannot work or get any aid or even a driver's license because they're not allowed to have a social security number. Both would like to find jobs. One brother, who's also attending UNM, was given a made-up social security number by the university so he could register there. He also has been allowed by the school to earn some money grading papers. All three brothers work on weekends doing yard work, trying to make ends meet. Confused, so is the Viengkeo family. It seems Ging came to Albuquerque in 1974 as an exchange student from Laos. While attending Highland, King's grandfather and uncle were killed when the Pathet Lao threw a hand grenade into their car. Ging's frightened parents fled with their family across the Mekong River into Thailand. Concerned about his family's welfare, King left for Thailand to visit them. He stayed in Thailand for 2 years. Meanwhile, because of the change in the Lao government, King's passport had been canceled by the Thai government. Neither he nor the rest of his family could leave Thailand. With the fall of Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, King's parents were afraid that Thailand would be next. Fearing for their children, his parents purchased Thai passports for them to get them safely out of the country. King and his two brothers came to the U.S. on tourist visas issued at the American Embassy in Bangkok. King's sister was already in the U.S. King and his brothers returned to Albuquerque in 1977 and entered school. King graduated from Highland in 1978 before entering UNM. When their visas expired, the brothers attempted to get their tourist status changed to a student status, but INS denied their request. The three next applied for permanent refugee status. The Immigration Service denied this request also, saying the brothers were Thai and Thailand was not at war, therefore they were not refugees. When they attempted to explain that they were from Laos, an INS official called them liars and accused them of coming into this country under false pretenses. Now the INS wants to deport King and his two brothers. A deportation hearing has been scheduled in January by the INS to determine the fate of the Viengkeo brothers. King has attempted to have the hearing moved from El Paso to Albuquerque because of the great expense of traveling to El Paso. His request was denied. King and his brothers continue to go to school and work at wherever they can, knowing that in 3 months' time, they may have to pick up the pieces of their lives once again and move on. So that was an article written about my family. I actually didn't see this article until I got married. So it wasn't until then that my father brought up the immigration status and how much shame he had with being undocumented for the longest time. They should have technically been refugees because of, again, all the complications that happened. It just didn't pan out that way. When amnesty was passed in the United States, that's actually when they were allowed to become citizens. So my first memory was waving the flag at my mom's naturalization ceremony and helping her say the Pledge of Allegiance. I was in kindergarten at the time. So when we talk about immigrants and refugees and undocumented folks, right, there's so much fluidity in status. For a lot of us, it doesn't mean anything, right? It just means what can we get because of our paperwork. So a lot of what we fight for at Asian Family Center is really around rights of all of our communities. So that's something that's been so important to me growing up. And I know Dali is the she's board president and founder, and she'll be speaking as well tonight, but Asian Family Center meant so much to me and means so much to me. It was something that I needed and I didn't know that I needed, right? Coming with my family, coming from the situation they did, there was so much trauma experienced from the war that a lot of that I think got passed to the children. Because when your parents are going through something very emotional and just trying to survive, you're going through it too, because you're witnessing what's happening. So when I found Asian Family Center, much later, right, I was just out of grad school before it started, but that was the first place where we started talking about mental health services for families. And that was a big aha moment for us because we knew it was something that was so needed, but no one was talking about it. And I just keep thinking, what would this agency have meant to my family when they had first arrived here? But nothing at that time had existed. So I brought here a painting. My dad did it, and he did sell paintings actually when he first arrived as a source of income because, again, he couldn't get any job. As you heard through the article, he did get called for a deportation hearing, and he was one final away from graduating from the University of New Mexico with his bachelor's degree, but because of the stress and the deportation hearing, he had to miss his final to go to that. And he was so traumatized by that whole process that he decided it's not worth it, I'm not going to go back to school. So he never finished his education, and he's completely self-taught, and he went on to be such an amazing man, and he gave so much back to the community, but because of that, my family really emphasized to us that education was your greatest gift. As people who lost everything, they told me they can take away your home, they can take away your identity, they can take away your country, but they can never take away your education. So that's what I took with me, and that's something that we at the center also have been cherishing. And for me, my biggest happiness at Asian Family Center is the youth leadership programs that we've been able to create, because now we've got a space where young people can talk about what is leadership for Asian Americans, and what does that really mean to them, what does that look to them, because it's different for all of us, and it doesn't fit when we have to follow this mode that we just don't relate to. So I'm just blessed to share part of my story. It was really my parents' story, but it's so connected to who I am and why I do the work. So thank you, Delhi, thank you for creating Asian Family Center, and thank you to all the great leaders who we've learned from. Asian Family Center is young, and a lot of our staffers are young, and we learned from those who did the work first in the community. So I'm just so blessed to be among this cohort.
Thank you, Kay. It's amazing. And what a great segue to invite Adélamar Alcántara.
It's pretty amazing because it's a Spanish lesson. I came to the United States as a graduate student, and I was an East-West Center grantee in Hawaii. And first day of school, we still had class cards at the time because this was in the 80s. So the teacher calls everybody, and he already called my name, but I didn't say present or here because he mispronounced my name. He said Adélamar Alcántara. I said, oh my God, that's so grating to the ear. So finally, after he went around, he said, what's your name? Are you Adélamar Alcántara? And I said, no, sir. I said, my name is Adélamar Alcántara, and you sing it. So he never forgot, and my classmates never forgot. I come to New Mexico, and they're still mispronouncing my name, so I started putting accent where it belongs. So, and at any rate, I came to New Mexico because I married a New Mexican, a Native American who wouldn't go anywhere. Even with a degree from MIT and a PhD in political science, he has to come back to New Mexico. I am also very fiercely Filipino, so I didn't want to live in the US. So we commuted for 7 years. Until finally, I get accidentally pregnant, and my job in the Philippines was family planning program evaluation. So perfect. And my husband has a degree in community and regional planning. So then years later, I would still go back and forth to the Philippines until 1994. So finally I said, this is insane. I will have to tell my university in the Philippines to give up my job to somebody else, that I will now stay in the US and make this my home. and my husband said, the Filipinos do not need you. There are many demographers in the Philippines, and there's only 32,000 pueblos, and I cannot go back with you to the Philippines. You have to stay here. And being Catholic, divorce is not an option. We could have a Filipino divorce where we would continue to commute, but that's not an option either, because the Philippines and New Mexico is like, depending on which way you go, it's 3 plane rides. Sometimes it could be a whole day of traveling. So given that, I settled, and I already had a job at UNM, but I said I'm going to be here only for 2 years, which now ended up to be 30 years next year. Okay, that's the pool of the Pueblo, I suppose. But while I was here, I was always mistaken for either Hispanic, which Filipinos are culturally Hispanic. 350 years of Catholic influence make you Hispanic. Or American Indian. And in fact, one day, we were visiting with a friend, and I was introduced to this guy from Oklahoma. He said, this is Deli from New Mexico, and this is her husband. And the guy looked at me and said, hello, and then put the newspaper right in front of his face. So I said, what's wrong with this picture? So I finally went to him again and I said, Clint, I said, why did you cover your face with the newspaper after you were introduced to me? And said, who do you think I am? And he said, well, I just broke up with my Hopi girlfriend, and you look like her. So I said, sorry, Clint, I'm from the other side of the world. So you can see, for someone who is so fiercely Filipino to be misidentified, you can take it once, you can take it twice, but too many times, I said, I have to do something. And there were not that many Filipinos in the 80s. I was here in 89, although I've been on and off because, like I said, Ted and I were married in 1977. I didn't come to New Mexico until 1988. So it's more than 7 years, right? So I have to decide for myself, how do I distinguish myself, not in a negative way, but to make sure that people realize, not that there's anything wrong with being Hispanic or Native American, but I already settled my identity crises when I was 15 until I was 25. So I know who I am, and I want people to recognize that, I have this identity. And then when I started, telling them Filipino, then they said, oh, you have an accent. Ooh, what is that accent? Because I can't hear it. So, at some point, when I was new to UNM, I was part of this planning committee, and they keep passing me over. I say something, they don't hear it. And I was the only woman there, and woman of color. So I finally said, and the provost was presiding and said, excuse me. I said, I just said that. I just said what you said, what you said. So I said, is something wrong with my accent? Or you don't see me because I'm a woman and I'm colored? So I said, tell me what I have to do so that you can hear me. They silence in the room, They didn't know how to deal with this little woman. Who's now just telling them, why are you not hearing me? So finally they apologized. Said, okay, next meeting, I said, I expect that when I say something, I will be acknowledged. But that did not stop me from being furious. Although I behaved myself throughout the rest of the meeting. But I went back to my office and I went to my director and I said, tell me, Brian, how does a minority behave? Because I have never been a minority in my entire life. So tell me, please. And I said, I don't know, Deli. I'm white male. So since then I started thinking, what do I have to do? Okay. Then I started working with the community. I had to figure out my own Filipino community, I tell you, because the Philippines comprise of 7,100 islands, and we have 100 and so languages, and we had been colonized for 350 years by Spain through Mexico, and then the Hollywood period came from 1898 to 1946. So the Philippines as a country and the Filipino as a people never really had its own identity. So to this day, we have what we call the colonial mentality. And because we come from very diverse regions, I had to figure out the Filipino community itself. How do I fit in? What do I do so that I don't come on as high and mighty? Because at the time I was the only Filipino with a PhD working at the university. I don't want to stick out like a sore thumb. If I have to work with my community, I have to develop humility. You know, so it took me 10 years to finally get involved with the Filipino American Association. Not as an officer, but part of the worker bee. And then finally when I figured out, I said, okay, what I learned from watching my own community is that we don't really have a strong sense of history. We know the history that was told us, but we don't really know the real history. We didn't even know that we were ruled by Spain through Mexico for 300 years, because the Philippines was too far before the Suez Canal. So they said, you want the Philippines? Pay for it. So 1565 Manila-Acapulco trade came about, and for 1565 up to 1815, the trade occurred between Manila and Acapulco with silk, porcelain from China and Japan. Slave trade, turns out Manila was a center of slave trade. So African slaves, Portuguese slaves, they brought them to the Philippines to be shipped to the US because there was, at some point, there was an embargo. And there was also the laws of the Indies that said you cannot enslave indigenous peoples of the colonies of Spain. So they cannot enslave the Filipinos. So they brought other people, you know, part of the slave trade. So none of those were part of our history, and we were learning that. So then I started the Filipino American National Historical Society for us to learn ourselves, about ourselves, and about our own history. And then I expanded, and I got recruited to be part of the Asian American Association from Tallinn. Bobby Noble said, oh, you're Asian? He said, I want you to join the Asian American Association. I said, sure. You know, so I joined. Next year I become president. I didn't even know. All of a sudden I'm president of Asian American Association. Esther was secretary at the time. And so then I kept saying, what is it that I can do for the Asian community? So not very long after I became president, I started the Asian, I called it at the time, the Asian Women's Center. But more and more I thought about it, no, I'm not being true to my community if I separate the families. So then I called it the Asian Family Center. And so then the Asian Family Center separated for some reasons or other. And I was executive director and volunteer grant writer for 4 years until I couldn't do it anymore. 250,000 is all I can raise. I can't raise anymore. So I said, the board, let's hire our executive director, and we had our first executive director, in case our second one. When I saw their CV, actually I confronted Kay, I said, why are you here? This is a non-profit organization, you may not have a future here. And she said, this is the place we want to be to serve our community. So I was happy about that because I was afraid that no one will work for the Asian Family Center, and I cannot do it because I'm not really very good with people. it may not look like that, but really, the people really wear me out. I like to work behind the scene, but I don't want you in my face all the time. I'm not that kind of person. So I'm just glad that, you know, the kids, anybody after 40 are kids to me, are happy working at the Asian Family Center. So, you know, thank you for being there, you know, the staff, and Esther for your support. When I was really floundering, it didn't really show, but I was really trying to figure out where can I use my skills? Because I knew I'm very skillful in organizing. I'm good at grant writing, but I'm not good one-on-one. And, you know, and the object I bought, I forgot. She's probably going to be upset with me. Anyway, this is the saint that we go every summer and have a pilgrimage. And the best part of that, and I was just telling Peter about it, is that my parents would lift me up so I could put my wish in that little box. And all my wishes have come true to the day that I grew up. So that 10 years ago, I stopped making wishes. Because I'm afraid I'll get them, and what do I have to give back in return? I'm afraid of what the universe will ask from me. So no more wishes for me. All I want is to be of service to the community. And next year I'm retiring, so I'm going to figure out what notoriety I can bring to the Asian community. And that's my story.
Thank you, Deb. I just want to mention that hopefully after everybody has had a chance to share their story, that you will ask any questions on an individual basis. Next, I would like to invite Fay Yao. Yep, there you are. Thank you.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Fay Yao. I am first generation Chinese American, and I've made Albuquerque home for the last 48 years. That's a long time. Yeah, this is where we went to school, both Eli and I, and we obtained our degree from UNM. As a matter of fact, our whole family graduated from UNM, all 4 of our kids as well. So we had our kids here, we established our professional life here, and it's been a good life. I worked for the Albuquerque Public Schools. I need this guide because 48 years is a long time. I don't want to get lost along the way, so this is going to help cue me as to what I could share with you. I work for the Albuquerque Public Schools in the capacity of a library media specialist. And I'm so glad to have met Lisa, another librarian here today. Okay. And for those years, for those of you, okay, I worked for Albuquerque Public School for 30-some years and retired just 4 years ago. And for those of you who are pondering retirement, I recommend it. Do it. I often tell this story of how I was twice immigrated because my parents got married in Hong Kong. And I was conceived in Hong Kong. But then my mom, without my consent, okay, immigrated to the Philippines to be with my father. Okay. And from the Philippines, then I came here. So I often tell that story to my friend, but what I seldom told them is the story of the struggle, the challenges, and the success and the reward at the end of all this. The Philippines, where I grew up, is a beautiful country, and the people are hardworking and very friendly. But the government is less than friendly to foreigners because my father was never naturalized. So all our life, even though all 6 of us, brothers and sisters, were born in the Philippines, we were considered foreigners all our life. And I grew up in my teenage years, especially the most idealist year of one's life, feeling really sad that I felt like a person without a country. So then in 1961, my father passed away. And because he was never a citizen, all his businesses were lost. They were confiscated from us. And that's when we decided, well, the only way is to get out because there's no future for the 6 children. And my mother at that point was 3 months with child. And with 5 other children, 6 of us, right, to raise without the means to sustain a living. But luckily though, we have our uncle who was a renowned Chinese medicine doctor. So with his help, well, he took over as the role of the patriarch and supported us unquestionably. We need money for pencil, we need money for notebook, we need money for our textbooks, which are like upward, as you all know, $60 per textbooks, you know. So he supported us unquestionably. And my sister and I, who are about 14 months apart, we were old enough, we were in our high school years, so we went and took up tutoring job. We tutored elementary school kids to earn a little bit of money to help with the family finances. This experience has taught us the importance of acting in a dutiful way, like my uncle to us. And then my sister and I, even though we're still very young, we worked and we did our duty to help support the family. I came to Albuquerque December of 1969. As a matter of fact, on Christmas Eve. That was a very festive time in this college town, but my heart was burdened and heavy. It's full of fear, as well as wonders for the future. In 1975, I obtained my permanent resident status, which was a great relief to me because now I feel like I truly belong in this community. I truly, really, finally belong somewhere. I have a country, I have a place, and I have a legal standing. So I started my professional endeavor and worked as a professional librarian at the public school, at the Albuquerque Public Schools. It took another 5 years before I and Eli were eligible to apply for and then obtain our U.S. citizenship. So that's a total of 10 years. We raised our family here, and Eli, as he shared the same immigration story as I did. All in all, our journey took 10 years, like I say. It's a long journey, but every bit valuable and precious to us. I would like to share with you, before I talk about this artwork, is that I want to share with you this quote from a Nigerian poet, which I think is so appropriate for tonight. Her name is Ijeoma Umembinyo. And this is in one of her writings. She said, "Here's to the security guards who maybe had a degree in another land. Here's to the manicurists who have to leave her family to come here, painting nails, scrubbing the feet of strangers. Here's to the janitors who don't understand English yet, but work hard despite it all. Here's to the fast food workers who work hard to see their families smile. Here's to the laundryman at the Marriott who told me with sparkle in his eyes how he was an engineer in Peru. Here's to the bus driver, the Turkish Sufi who almost danced when I quoted Rumi. And here is to their children, to the children who, despite it all, become artists, writers, teachers, doctors, lawyers, activists, and some rebels. Well, keep on. I would like to point out first, this artwork right here, it represents, it actually is 100 words if you had counted them, written in different styles of the word soul. Soul in Chinese is longevity in English. And long life is a very important to us, important to all of us, right? And also besides long life, my mom's wish for me is that I will continue my study for a long, long time. Now, she herself did not have any education until she was age 9 because her father, of a very traditional mode, did not believe in educating girls. Okay? Until my grandmother met a sister from a Catholic church who convinced my grandmother to send her girls, her daughters, to school free. I think that's a key word, free. Okay. So then that was the thing that convinced my grandfather, okay, you can go now. And that's how the girls all got educated. Now, she never stopped learning because of that craving and that longing for education in her early ages. She would have, if you had met her, she passed away 2 years ago. If you had met her when she was alive, you would have seen her with a notebook in her hand and a pen at all times. She would jot down words that she didn't understand, and she would go home and look it up in the dictionary. She's constantly studying. When she came and stayed with me for several years, she went to see TVI. Back then, CNM was TVI back then, to study for GED. Now, she had her degree in Chinese from Hong Kong, but she lacked the degree. She said, I lack my degree in English. I want my degree. So we signed her up at TVI, and she studied for her GED. And guess what? At age 60, she got her degree. And she was even featured in the newspaper back then. Okay. And so these styles of writing is a very ancient style of writing. We don't write like this anymore. This is what we call an ancient script. Okay? And if you took the time, do count them. There are 100 words in here. And because of her influence and her desire for us to learn and to be universal and to be educated, so not just in the literature, but also in art. So she sent me and my sister to Hong Kong for several summers in a row for us to learn Chinese painting. Chinese painting is executed with just a single brush and with only black ink. As you can see, there's no color on here. But it's amazingly, black ink can turn into many different colors. And this was a painting that I did some years ago when I taught some painting class for the city senior art program. And this was not a very formal painting, but a very meaningful painting to me, because as I was painting, I was also remembering my mom's teaching in her artwork for me. So I started scribbling and scribbling, and for me, I was writing the word plum flower over and over and over again, just like she did here, the word soul, over and over and over again. Not quite the 100, but enough to fill this paper. So, and thank you so much.
I wish to invite Esther Churchwell to tell her story.
Well, first of all, name Churchwell, that's American as they'll get. It's actually Oklahoma, but I was born and raised in Hawaii. I'm a third generation, or Sansei, Okinawan. I represent the Japanese community because Okinawa came under Japanese rule in 1972 again. Prior to that, they were under the control of the U.S. government. If you look at the, I wish I had a map, it shows the location of Okinawa, which is just outside of Japan. It's a strategic military area, and that's why Okinawa has been occupied by the U.S. Same thing as Hawaii. We were a territory of the United States because it's also another strategic military area. But when World War II came about, at that time in the islands of the Hawaiian Islands, there were more Asians there, more Japanese and more Chinese than there were any others. So when Pearl Harbor was bombed, they could not arrest or round up all of the Asians because they needed the Japanese to help out during that time. The other thing too is that they relied on all of, like, my parents never talked about that day because it was an embarrassing day for them. Although they were Americans, they were born in Hawaii, but at a young age, they had gone to Okinawa and then returned another time. So there was no problem or no issues regarding immigration or citizenship. They were all citizens of the United States at that time. So listening to all of the other stories, we never had that issue at all. And also there in Hawaii, when I was growing up there, I didn't think anything about ethnicity, only because within our own family, we have a United Nations of our own. We've got African American, I've got Native American, relatives. It's all mixed. It wasn't until I left Hawaii at age 18, that was in 1964, so you now know how old I am. I went to California. I went to California to attend college because that was the closest, to. And I grew up on a farm. We were very poor farmers. We hardly saw any currency money. We grew up on the farm. We lived off the farm. My father worked at night after working on the farm during the day to earn some cash. When we went to school, although we were farmers, poor farmers, they wanted us to be like the other kids. We went to schools with the city kids who ate hot lunches. And so at that time, our lunch was only a quarter. So that's where his night job was, where we have 5 children. So we would, be able to buy hot lunch. He nor my mother wanted us to take, a sack lunch with us at all. And being Asians, it wouldn't be sack lunch. I don't know if you've seen the tin boxes, lunch boxes. That's what we would have to carry. And he didn't want us to be embarrassed because of that. Well, there in school, in about the 4th grade, when all the teachers knew that we were pretty poor, they had, I think all of my siblings, but we worked in the cafeteria. I was a cashier, so we could have free lunches. So that paid for our lunches right there. But all the years growing up, as I said, as far as the value of money, we never saw money because from our farm, it was more of a barter type. That's how we would, we'd sell things and we would get, like we would go to the feed store. I don't know if some of you remember, but when you would go to a feed store, the feed was packaged in cotton material. My father would take us to the feed store and he would have the girls pick out which pattern or which material we wanted to make our skirts and everything. And so we would sew our own clothing. My grandmother, bless her heart, she would use those white flour bags or rice bags. She would bleach them out. Every single member in our family wore white boxer shorts, because that's all she could make. It wasn't until I was in high school that I begged my mother, can we at least buy some underwear? Because I was embarrassed. During PE, you would have to change in front of everybody. And I was the only girl in school that had white boxer shorts. But anyway, but it was still, I wasn't really, you know, that embarrassed of being poor. I was just embarrassed because we looked different than the city kids that were here. But we were complimented a lot about the clothing that we sewed ourselves and everything, because no one else had that same material. You know, a lot of kids had similar material, and so they would always ask us, where'd you get that material? Well, yeah. I wanted to tell them, go to the feed store down the street. But after, you know, growing up on the farm, and as I looked around the farming area, my sisters and I talked about it. I said, I'll be damned if I'm going to marry that next farmer's son and live on the farm for the rest of our lives. So that's why all 3 girls in our family went to college. And I went to California only because as I was growing up, I always wondered what was on the other side of the ocean. You know, it was so vast and you couldn't see anything. So my brother had been in the military, so he had seen places other than Hawaii. But I went to California, graduated from Cal State LA with my bachelor's and master's degree. Then I moved around the country when I got married. We lived in different places, but I came to New Mexico only because there in California we had the earthquakes. Went to Oklahoma, the tornadoes. And there we went to Florida, Miami, the hurricanes. It wasn't until I was in Florida and I worked at Florida International University, I actually got a map of the United States out to see where they had the least amount of natural disaster. Believe it or not, New Mexico was it. At that time, the only thing they had was New Mexico was the 2nd highest in the nation for lightning. And I thought, if you're dumb enough to be outside when you can take shelter, yeah. So I came to New Mexico, to Albuquerque, but I also had an uncle who was teaching at the School of Medicine at that time. So between California and Oklahoma, we would always have Albuquerque as our stop-off point. And so I've been familiar with Albuquerque, and I thought, that's where I'm going to go. Except the first year I was here, there was a tornado that hit the fairgrounds and everything, and I thought, oh my God, I must have made a mistake. But anyway, I grew up in I would call a traditional Asian family where our elders were highly respected. We went to regular school, but after school we would have to go to Japanese school. We had to learn to speak formal Japanese and write Japanese for our elders. My father spoke, there in Hawaii, spoke broken English. My mother could speak English, Japanese, and Okinawan. The language is very different. When we were little, my parents and my grandmother would speak Hokkien, which is the ancient language, so that the children wouldn't understand. But as we got older and being around other Okinawans, we could understand, you would pick up the language. So after a while, they couldn't hide what they were talking about. And, but we went through Japanese school, and until my parents and elderly, you know, our aunts passed away, I used to write in Japanese and send my, especially at Christmas time, letters to them, or my Christmas greetings to them. But to give you an example, in every celebration that we had, I always loved the Okinawan music. They were very lively music. And over 10 years ago, I met an Okinawan group here, and it wasn't until I was part of the Asian American Association. Remember, we used to go to the Rotunda in Santa Fe. We had to look for groups to perform or, you know. And so I had contacted the Okinawan group, and we all went up there and they performed, and I felt obligated to them because they took off from their jobs and they had gone there. And I felt so obligated to them for volunteering their time, taking days off from their work. I told them I will join you because I am Okinawan also. So since that time, I had been performing with them, but about 6 years ago, I stopped performing due to some medical problems. I am a lot better. Last year, during our annual Akimatsuri Fall Festival, I rejoined them, and we were going to have our farewell performance all together again. Well, it went so well that the instructor who flew in from California came back and said, "Will you all dance again?" So this year we're going to do it again. She moved away 5 years ago, but she's been flying in every year for our fall festival in September. So she will be coming in soon, and we will have to do some crash course training because a number of us had not danced in a while. But as I said, this is a doll that has been handed down to me from my family, and it has traveled everywhere with me. And now, if you look at the costume, on the hat, the blue section signifies the ocean, because Okinawa is surrounded by water. So those are the waves and everything. The costume itself, the actual costume, is about $1,000. You know, I've gone to Okinawa several times because after my father retired, he wanted to go back to Okinawa, so he did. He went back there in the 70s, and you know, my family, my siblings and I made several trips back there. And it was really interesting to be surrounded by all that music and the liveliness of what they're doing. And the other thing too is my siblings and I remember some of the Hogan, the ancient language. It's a dying language because there in the schools right now they teach Japanese and English. No Hogan, because there's not that many people who remember Hogan. I'll give you an example of what the difference is. In Japanese, as you come through the door, we would welcome you. We would say "Irashaimasu." In Okinawan language, it would be "Ippe nihe dibiru," so it's totally different. "Ippe nihe dibiru" is thank you. I'm sorry. "Arigatou gozaimasu" is the Japanese one. "Irashaimasu" in Okinawan is "Mensore." So there's, as I said, it's very different. But when we go down, there's marketplaces there in Okinawa. And we would go to these marketplaces, and they're all elderly people. So they would be speaking Hogan, and my siblings and I would respond to them in Hogan, which surprised them because they don't see young people speaking that at all. And so I've gone back there several times, but since my parents have passed away, I haven't been there in about 7 years now. But every 5 years during Okinawa, anyone who has had any connection with Okinawa go back there for what they call taikai. People from all over the world, Okinawans, will go back. That's a time for them to celebrate, to be back again. The last time I was there during the taikai, I flew to Hawaii to see my family first. I've got uncles and aunts there. From Hawaii, I flew to Okinawa. And when I got on the plane, all these planes were it had Okinawans from all over the world. I happened to be on the plane with Okinawans from Brazil. And there in Brazil, they speak Portuguese, not Japanese. And it was interesting sitting next to them and they started speaking Hogan. And so I could understand what they were saying. But this whole plane was filled with Brazilians. And it was difficult to distinguish who were the Okinawans and who were the Brazilians, because there was intermarriage, like in Hawaii. And it just so happened that during the parade, a group of ladies and I were in the parade also, and we were representing New Mexico. The Brazilians were right in front of us. Well, we had a couple of guys in our group. They loved being in back of the Brazilians, because if you've seen those Brazilian girls, their headdress, and when you see them from the behind, there's not much, no clothing. So it was a mile, of this parade. These elderly guys did not mind walking a mile by having those behinds in front of them. But throughout the island, no one complains. When they're having festivals, people are working during the day, so from about 8 o'clock at night, they would be practicing their dance, their taiko. Their taiko is different. They're holding the taikos and they're dancing and jumping up and down with them. Very, very lively. So you would hear this in the neighborhoods, but nobody complained about the noise because it was part of their culture that you accepted it, and they were going to showcase it at their festivals and everything. So, as I said, that as far as the hat and everything, there's the ocean, and on the very top is a flower. And a number of our dances, this particular dance that we do in this costume is for celebrations. So whenever we started, our Akimatsuri or Fall Festival, they started off with that dance because that dance would signify a blessing of that occasion. And what they hold, and I've got one here, are bamboo castanets. And the castanets, as you're clicking them, it signifies purifying this event for them and everything. And, but now, this is my instructor who flies in. She's dressed in like a men's, she did a men's dance in that particular photo. This was done at the South Broadway Cultural Center. We performed there. And so it's kind of dark because whoever took the picture took it of us on stage and not where there was lighting. But the dance is there in Okinawa. If any of you have seen Karate Kid, and they had a scene where they were in Okinawa. The Okinawans celebrate everything. A good crop, anything, good fortune, things like that. But the dances are very similar to martial arts, because way back in feudal times, commoners, farmers, could not learn martial arts. Martial arts was only used by nobility or the samurais. So in order to protect themselves, because back then they were pirates, because it's just surrounded by water, they camouflaged the martial arts with their dances. And one of the dances that I do, it has to do with a fisherman, and I've got an oar. Now, when you're on the sand and when you're pushing the sand out, that means you could hit your enemy in back of you with that. And just the way we block things. So there's a lot of martial arts involved in our dances. And we have some dances that are very feminine, but quite a few of them are more of the martial art movements and everything. So, but as I said, from a very humble beginning, and part of this is to remember our culture and everything. And so that's what we're doing. And I'm also part of the New Mexico Japanese American Citizens League, which on a national, we're a chapter at the national level. It was formed in 1929, and we are a civil rights group, and we will fight for anyone's civil rights here. And it's not just the Japanese. It started out for the Japanese Americans, but right now we're involved in a lot of other work, especially with the Muslims too, and everything. And there's been a lot of activity about the immigration issues. And so the Japanese, the American Citizens League have been taking stances regarding immigration issues right now too. So, as I said, you know, growing up in Hawaii, I never knew what discrimination was, because when I look around our family, we've got, you know, just about every ethnic group in our family. I just didn't know any better until I went to California. So, thank you very much.
Very quick, just read that writing letter. No, I just asked you to read later on. I was born and I was born and raised in Hiroshima, Japan, and I've been in this country for over 40 years. And I was raised in a conservative, traditional society, and but I was little, and then I'm the black sheep of family, and everybody, all my brothers and sisters, got married to the spouse or person who were approved by my parents. Here I am. I left Japan and came here, and I fit in right away. I didn't have any problem with the culture and everything else, and I got married here. But anyway, when you look at your own culture from foreign countries, or look into from outside, you'll see clearly about your culture. And it was my case. And also I felt like how little I knew, especially like religion, Buddhism, and so forth, because many people asked me about it. And so kind of, I woke up and then I had to study about Japan more. And it's a beautiful culture. I wanted to introduce and then share with the people in Albuquerque. So I was involved with a big undertaking project, like Japan in Albuquerque. That was a week event, and people from Japan, like 800 of them came, entertainers and so forth. And another one was Japan Week, and it ran a few weeks involving different exhibits and so forth. And also I help people too, and kind of being bridge between Japan and here people. And anyway, about culture, when I was being raised or spent my adult life in Japan or Hiroshima, I didn't appreciate the culture, and I didn't appreciate the things I used to see. But once I left that country, for instance, the dolls never looked that beautiful in Japan. But when I came to this country, she really looked different. And about my wedding gown, that's pretty old now, like almost 40 years old. Nowadays, it's more colorful. But at that time, we used to wear white kimono underneath, and then that was wedding gown. But now the time is really changing and very colorful. And and I'm still a Japanese citizen. I still hold Japanese passport after 40 years. And I feel like kind of tie would be stiffer if I switched. And I always feel like I wonder how my family would feel. So I'm still Japanese. And Anyway, when I came to this country and went to college, I took English and 101, 102, A+ and so forth, but some American student didn't think I would make a good grade. And Spanish, when I took, American students said, must be very hard for you. No, this is another foreign language, and for Americans it's a foreign language too. And when I was a directory assistant for 9 months, and majority customers were nice, but there was one nasty customer said, speak in English. It really hurt me. But I thought, oh, well, probably he knows only English. I know 2 languages. I had to feel a little pride and superiority, right? Anyway, I really like American culture, very open. Japanese society is still kind of closed. So anyway, I didn't have any problem adjusting here. And anyway, like I said, I was really a black sheep of the family. And I'm the only one who gave my parents lots of gray hair. And in '69, at that time, Japanese girls really didn't travel, foreign countries, but my girlfriend and I traveled for 2 months. And now, looking back, I'm sure my parents were worried every day. Here I was having a ball. How selfish could it be? Anyway, I'll be short. Okay? That will be it. Thank you for your attention.
That's our last story. But before I thank you for coming, I think it is such a gift when people tell their personal stories. It's very intimate. It closes a divide. We find common ground, and it nurtures our empathy. And I think we need a lot more storytelling these days. So I really thank you very much for all of you coming together and being vulnerable. But it's warming, but I get goosebumps, so that's weird. So thank you all for coming. Those of you who are here for the first time, I encourage you to sign up for our newsletter. We are planning other programs during this exhibit, so we'll be making those announcements as those are finalized, and we'll send that out if you're interested in joining us. We would really like to invite the public to come and tell their stories, so kind of like a talking circle. So if you enjoyed this, maybe you can participate next time. So thank you all for coming, and have a wonderful evening. Thank you. Oh, that's good.